Monsters exist, and they are everywhere.
If you create a world of darkness, if you write half a dozen game lines fleshing out a world of monsters and what makes them tick, well then, someone is going to want to slay them. Hunter the Reckoning was a trilogy of hack-and-slash 4-player co-op Xbox and eventually GameCube games that were released starting in 2002. Although the middle game, Wayward, was released on the PS2 instead of the Xbox. Presumably because the devs hate us and don't want us to play all three. They were well loved, from their tough but exciting gameplay, to their grindhouse-style graphics, to just the story of a town gone mad. Most who played these games remember them fondly, but they may not realize that Hunter was merely a fragment of a massive tabletop role-playing franchise. It was part of the World of Darkness, a role-playing system that was second only to D&D at the time. You didn't play as heroes in these games. You played as the monsters. That should about do it. Hunter the Reckoning, both in its tabletop form and its video game adaptations, was inevitable. At first, it may seem somewhat like a betrayal of the core concept of the World of Darkness, a game about hunting monsters in a world about playing as them. But the truth is that Hunter the Reckoning was always going to happen. For nearly a decade, the Goth-Punk setting of the World of Darkness had rolled on, beginning with the mega hit that was Vampire the Masquerade. There were successes like Mage the Ascension and Werewolf the Apocalypse, but there were also flops like Wraith the Oblivion, despite having excellent themes and writing. But with every supplement and expansion that was released, White Wolf did something strange, managing to increase the prominence of monsters, inadvertently demoting humanity within their own society and their own world. And with every word written, humanity somehow became more and more interesting, the underdog in a world of darkness. It started in 1992 with a Vampire the Masquerade supplement called Hunters Hunted, outlining mortal vampire hunters and how they operate. This wasn't a full game line, though. It existed first and foremost to expand the lore and universe of Vampire the Masquerade. 1995 brought the Werewolf the Apocalypse supplement Project Twilight, which developed the idea of government agencies that dealt with monsters in differing ways. Yet again, this was a mini-system, in part existing to provide lore for werewolf groups about the government's response to their antics. In 1999 came the full system about slaying monsters. It would be called Hunter the Reckoning. Hunter had some strange ability to reach people who wouldn't otherwise be interested in the World of Darkness, as evidenced by the successful and beloved trilogy of co-op video games we're here to discuss. Games that I think many fans never knew was attached to a wider franchise. Hunter the Reckoning was a new take on monster hunting. A take that hasn't truly been replicated in any other monster hunter media outside of this system. The World of Darkness has always been Gothic punk, straddling the line between both subcultures. The game lines within each have those elements in different quantities. Vampire obviously was farther on the goth spectrum. Meanwhile, Werewolf was much more punk. But Hunter the Reckoning took that dial and turned it all the way in one direction, farther than any World of Darkness game had done before. Hunter the Reckoning doesn't contain punk themes. Hunter the Reckoning is a game about being a punk. From award-winning designers at Ghostfire Gaming, a godless world where only hunters can save us now. Today's sponsor has everything you need to rip and rend your way through the forces of evil. In Grim Hollow, the gods are dead, and the world is cloaked in shadow. Grim Hollow brings D&D 5th edition compatible dark fantasy to your tabletop role-playing groups in a big way, even setting you up with a brand new Monster Hunter base class. Perfect for bringing the fight to the creepy crawlies that stalk the dark fields.
Don't tarry in the darkness for too long, Hunter, or you'll find your body transforming in one of a dozen different ways, becoming the very thing you sought to destroy. But if that doesn't bother you, why not wield the weapons of your enemies on your hunt? Try out profane new subclasses such as the Devourer, consuming monsters to gain their power, or cut a bloody trail through the world as a paladin of slaughter, or even drain the blood of your foes and turn it into magical trickery as the Sanguine Thief. But Grim Hollow isn't just for hunters, it's also for storytellers. Learn the ins and outs of the enshrouded world of Itharis and receive battle-tested advice on how to run dark fantasy stories at your tables. Grim Hollow hits Kickstarter today, so head over there and get yourself copies of the brand new books from Ghostfire Gaming. But be careful, Hunter. Grim Hollow makes monsters of us all. Before we dive into the video games, let's take some time to acquaint ourselves with Hunter the Reckoning and what makes it special. It's a world of darkness, but don't let that fool you. It's a lot like our own, only the despair bites just a little deeper. And you are just a person living in it. Things are good sometimes, but not usually. You can never seem to catch a break. Stability always seems just beyond reach. Layoffs at work, cost of living, everyone is so stressed, depressed, and anxious that they can't keep up healthy relationships. But was this your fault? In a world of opportunity, are you and your peers just the ones who couldn't hack it in the big leagues? Most people spend their lives like this, never quite reaching that place where they feel secure, where they feel like they can just live. You'll never quite get that happily ever after. Something always gets in the way. And so, you've stayed like this, struggling at work to make ends meet, hoping against all hope that someday, somehow, your ship will come in. But one day, you catch a glimpse of something unexpected. The world has always been cruel, but in a dark moment, you catch a glance at the why of it. The mask slips, if only for a second, and you can see the people causing all of this as they are. They're monsters. No, they're literally monsters. That boss who worked your father so hard that he ruined his body is in no way figuratively a demon. The office snitch who rats you out when you complain is a ghoul, and your boss is the bloodsucker who controls him. Your grandmother's never been the same after she fell a few years back. Well, that's because she's dead, her body reanimated by a confused wraith. And worse, you suspect the doctors know it's not what they say it is, but they keep giving her the same medicine, happy so long as they get paid. And now that you've seen it, you can't unsee it. There's no going back. Families forced off their farms by werewolves, reps of gas companies corrupted by some kind of chaos deity. It's a world of monsters playing on the innocent. They don't just live on the fringes. It's their world. It's never been yours, the world of the common people. It's theirs, the monsters. They've built it so they can dominate us while staying hidden. Everything you've known, the entire structure of your society, it's all just lies to keep you complacent, to explain away the contradictions. But perhaps the most horrifying part of this is that just because you see it doesn't mean you can do anything about it. You're still bound by the same old rules. What would your grandfather say if you showed up to put your grandma's walking corpse to rest? You've seen how these creatures prey on people, but there's nowhere you can turn to for help. The institutions are all compromised. The cops either complacent or they're in on it. The reporters won't believe you, and if they do, they're never gonna get their story past the editors. And the government? Well, the government is riddled with ghouls, vamps, witches, cultists, or those who seek to use the creatures of darkness for their own ends. No one is coming to help you. And then it gets worse. You've told so many people about what you've seen, and no one believes you. Well, almost no one. A few rare and scarce people have seen the very same thing you have. They see the world as it is, a world of monsters and injustice, but they say something that shakes you to your core. There is nothing we can do. You are not like them. They're just bystanders, aware of the monsters, but unwilling to act. To be a hunter is simply to see the injustice of the world of darkness. These monsters, the greed, the products, hawk to you to keep you complacent, and to just say, fuck that. It's to see society for what it is, and to have this compulsive need to do something about it. Hunters call it the drive. To be a hunter is to be the resistance, not just to the monsters, but to the entire society you live in. You've had no luck finding others like you on the street, but your compulsive need to know what you're up against leads you to HunterNet, an obscure internet forum filled with others like you. Tangent here, the original Hunter the Reckoning was published in 1999, when forums were new and up and coming and stuff. In the modern day, unfortunately, forums are mostly kind of old and dying out. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I liked forums. I still like forums. This is very sad that it's come to this. In its place, the 2022 edition of Hunter the Reckoning lightly implies that maybe you can find other monster hunters on Reddit, which is objectively hilarious. We did it, Reddit. The Boston Bomber was a vampire. Some of these other hunters start walking you through the wider world of monsters and hunting, but others work on getting you philosophically up to speed with what you're planning. If you choose to kill a monster, you're a murderer. These creatures were human to you until like 5 minutes ago, and you'd have objected to killing them pretty recently. What's more, these creatures are still human to everyone else around you, and they're just as intelligent and thoughtful as anyone else. Killing them is murder, and it's wishful thinking to absolve yourself of it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you won't have to do it on occasions. But to give you an alternative, you learn that there are many, many different ways to handle the beasties that stalk the world. Killing them is only one. There are many creeds that different hunters follow. Some wish to kill them all, others wish to redeem them. Some hunters only go after monsters that have directly harmed people, while others are driven simply to understand the secrets that the monsters have been keeping from us all this time. They teach you what they can, as best they can, through an old internet forum. They teach you how to socially isolate the targets and keep victims away from danger. They teach you how to turn monsters against each other or to turn their natures upon themselves. And yes, some of the users are happy to teach you how to get away with murder. After lurking for a while, learning the techniques of your trade, you find other HunterNet users in your local area. You team up and form a cell, finally ready to go on your first hunts. After a great deal of work, research, stalking your prey, and desperate fights against it, you succeed in taking down a few monsters. You plant evidence that your vampiric boss is breaking a code of rules called the Masquerade, and soon his peers have ended his immortal life, so you don't have to. You kidnap the local manager of the corrupted oil company and hand him over to the shapeshifters in the forest so that they'll leave the city folk alone. News reports would say that he was killed by wolves. And you finally sit down with the wraith possessing your grandmother. It won't negotiate, but you do find out why it's here. You and your fellow hunters destroy its anchors and banish it to the afterlife. It was as though Grandma passed peacefully in the night. But there are always more of them. It's a monster's world after all. You're just the resistance. And maybe you could have dealt with that, been content with that. Fighting that hopeless fight, knowing that you were doing all you could to protect the innocent. Maybe you could have dealt with it if the innocent had the good sense to appreciate what you were doing. The more the drive calls you to hunt, and the more of your life you devote to it, the harder it gets to connect with the people you're supposed to be doing this on behalf of. You're on thin ice at work. The new boss may be human, but he doesn't like how often you call out. It's not like you could bring a doctor's note that you were banishing demons. Your loved ones are tired of hearing you constantly bring up the injustice and the monsters. You see news reports about beasties you've slain, ignorantly commemorating them as innocent victims. The more and more you become absorbed in the hunt, that you give in to your drive, the easier it gets to hate humanity. When it started, it just felt like you knew a secret that others didn't. But they could come around and see the flaws of the world we're living in, see the injustice of it all. But after all this time, their ignorance begins to feel willful. They're accepting of the oppressive status quo. It starts to feel like they're taking the side of the monsters over you. And this is the horror of being a punk. But it's also the horror of being a hunter. And that should be obvious from the way that the game line structures it. To be a hunter is to recognize the evil in the system and feel a compulsive need to do something about it. That's just being a punk. This was implicit in the original 1999 edition, but the modern version just outright says it. To be a hunter is to be a punk, whether you spike your hair and get a bunch of tattoos or not. Some may not like that the new edition made it text instead of subtext, but I actually think it's quite warranted. It was more obvious back then, when punks were a more prominent subculture. There's one other big change between the modern and the original Hunter the Reckoning, though.
A few of you may already have been screaming the word imbuement into your monitor as I was describing what a hunter is.
And the reason I didn't bring it up till now is that imbuement has always been quite divisive, even at launch. So, Hunter the Reckoning is about humans fighting back against the monsters, right? But in the OG Hunter the Reckoning, you're also kind of superheroes. The moment you saw monsters, you would become imbued by heralds who certainly seemed to be angels. You would be given magical powers and tools to strike back against evil. You were still weaker than the monsters, to be clear, but you had supernatural abilities of your own to call on. This aspect of Hunter was removed after the World of Darkness ended, and was replaced by the Chronicles of Darkness. Hunter the Vigil would release without gifted superpowers or messengers. The modern edition of Hunter would follow Vigil's example, and remove imbuement and the supernatural powers it gave.
To be clear, in both Vigil and the new edition, there are magic powers and stuff that can be obtained by the hunters, but the ability to obtain a small number of faith-based powers is far and away a different thing from being a magically empowered hunter by default.
Many feel that it betrays the original source material to remove imbuement, while others believe that the original betrayed its own concept by making hunters champions of supernatural entities. So I personally call this one a draw. If you loved imbuement, I feel your pain. Sad to see such a radical shift from the original in that case. But if you hated imbuement and just wanted to play as normal people in a hopeless fight, well, now you've got it, and that's actually kind of great. I hear a lot of complaints about the modern World of Darkness, but I don't hear them about the new edition of Hunter very much. Where do I personally stand on all of this? Honestly, I started out quite skeptical of imbuement. I was a bit peeved that we weren't embracing the existential horror of being a normal human in a world ruled by monsters. But I tried to reserve judgment. The fact that the messengers granting you power were mysterious and untrustworthy had some potential for good story angles. Unfortunately, having seen where that ended up going in the game's metaplot, I remain unconvinced. I don't think it provided much of value compared to what was actually lost by including it. Hunter's themes are also just really tight overall, other than imbuement. The whole scions of supernatural beings thing doesn't really parallel the punk experience in any way, well, any way that's obvious to me at least. I won't spoil for you who the messengers are, though, in this video, since if you do want to play Old Hunter the Reckoning, the mystery is the best angle of Imbuement. But suffice it to say, in Old Hunter, you're more of a Buffy, or a Blade. In New Hunter, you're more of a Winchester. Keep that in mind if you decide to pick up a copy of Hunter the Reckoning. The player characters of Hunter the Reckoning meet, not at a tavern, but in a prison. Each gathered here for their own reasons in the town of Ashcraft to witness the execution of a murderer named Arcady.
Things did not go according to plan. They call this the imbuing. When everything you've ever known becomes a lie. Of all the people present that day, only the four of us could see. See the guards for the monsters they were. And see the dead rise from the depths of Ashcraft prison to take their revenge. In the end, we managed to push the creatures back and finally lock them away in the prison. No one would ever have to disturb them again. Or so we hoped.
1 year later, we return to Ashcraft. An ill-advised rave inside the abandoned prison has brought the angry spirits to life once more. We hunters will have to put an end to the threat that made us who we are, once and for all. Now, the town may be in ruins, but at least the train still works. Or at least it did, until now. Hunter the Reckoning is first and foremost a co-op game, balanced for 4 players, and no, it doesn't scale down if you're not working with a full party. With that in mind, this game is actually quite difficult with anything less than the full 4. I brought in a second player, both to make things a little easier for myself and to embrace the spirit of the co-op, and we were able to beat this game with some marginal difficulty. However, despite being balanced for 4, there's a very real argument that the game might actually be easier solo, and that's for a specific reason. The greatest enemy you'll face in this game isn't any form of monster. It's the fucking camera, holy shit! It's workable solo because it moves with you, but that's not what you're going to get out of multiplayer. It moves with the sort of average location of the party, so it was a constant fight to coordinate, even with only 2 players. I can hardly imagine doing it with 4. It's so stiff that you'll need to coordinate very heavily, like we're all going to dodge to the left when the boss attacks. Otherwise, you're going to end up with one of the characters locked in the corner, stuck between monsters and invisible walls. Here on the train platform, we get a quick tutorial via the Hunter glyphs. You rescue the engineer from some zombies, and he thanks us. Apparently, we're going to need to rescue at least 50 people and send them here if we want to clear the tracks and evacuate any single person from the town of Ashcraft, also known as the good ending. Throughout the game, there will be innocents we can save from their attackers, and they will usually not be grateful for what you've done.
What the hell is wrong with you people?
Remember, you're imbued, you can see the zombies. The citizens look at everything that's happening, and their brains literally cannot comprehend it, and they just see it as a violent riot. While they are happy to be saved from their inexplicably violent neighbors, they're understandably not too thrilled about the fact that, from their point of view, you just showed up and machine-gunned a crowd. From here, we get out into the infested streets of Ashcraft. It's mainly zombies out here, plus a few exploding spiders to teach us a lesson. The lesson that we've got ranged weapons and we're expected to use them. There's a trade-off in the game balance between ranged and melee combat. You're going to get hit a lot more often in melee, but you're also right in the thick of it, so you'll pick up all the health and mana orbs as they get dropped. So long as you're killing fast enough, the damage you take and the mana you spend will be replenished as quick as you lose it. But if you start to fall behind or get swarmed, you're in grave danger. Ranged is the opposite. It's lower risk, and so you won't take very much damage. On the other hand, the damage that you do take and the mana you use up is going to be difficult for you to get back, since most of the orbs will have despawned by the time you're able to grab them.
Both methods have their place, and they're both kind of equally valid. Certain enemies, though, are going to really require you to switch your tactics to either melee or ranged. It's honestly a pretty well-balanced game in this way. Reaching the outskirts of the prison, we're told of a child who has survived all of this and is hiding from the monsters in a playground. We head over and clear out the rots, as well as the very first boss. He's not too difficult to deal with so long as you've got fast instincts on the jump button to get over his shockwaves. Which, this is the first boss. You probably haven't built those instincts yet. We certainly hadn't. Beating the boss allows the girl and her strange savior to reveal themselves. The savior is a ghost, and he doesn't like hunters.
You think I can't see you shaking at the other end of that barrel? Do you think I don't know that your brain is trying to process the horrible fact that, oh my God, it talks? And if it talks, it thinks. And you can't stand that, can you? When are you going to learn that you're not hunters? You're sheep with shotguns. You don't want me for your enemy. So take the help.
I just don't think I can trust you.
The ghost tells us that the girl, Kaylee, is separated from her parents, who are hiding in a nearby church. And just to make sure that we didn't forget that this is an early 2000s game, that means that the next level is an obnoxious escort quest as we drag a frightened child and her teddy bear across a zombie-infested graveyard. At the church, it's a happy reunion, until Teddy is discarded, and then the ghost possessing it gets jealous.
Here it comes!
Here, you bastards.
We beat up the teddy bear and soon send the newly minted orphan back to the train station for evacuation. He's very slightly tougher than the last boss, but we had an easier time because we were a little better used to the game now. That S&M ghost from earlier greets us again, introducing himself this time as Carpenter, and telling us of the catacombs and sewers that lead into the jail. We descend, and our hunt begins for real. We fight our way through the hellscape below the city, our enemies growing more varied and more difficult as time goes on. Gun zombies, gargoyles, rabid dogs, alligators, vampire girls with Uzis. Wait, hold up, vampires? I thought the cause of this was restless ghosts, aka, wraiths. So why are there kindred here? Searching for answers, we start clearing the prison. When we find Warden Dankenhart, we find the answer as to why the vampires are here. It's because he's one of them. Decades ago, the kindred came and turned him into one of them, murdering his family and using the prison as their own private blood bank. Over decades, the Warden eliminated the ones who sired him, until only he and a scientist named Hadrian were left. Presumably, the vampires we keep fighting are Dankenhart and Hadrian's progeny. Dankenhart tells us that we can find Arcadian death row. We'll have to kill him to put all the other spirits to rest. He makes no move to attack us, but come on, we're hunters. We're not about to let it go that Dankenhart has just been using the prison for Lord knows what vampiric trickery for the last few decades. We fight him, and he's the first proper difficult boss in the game. He took us a solid few attempts to take down, which actually was kind of a big problem because there's not a save rune outside of his door. You have to repeat the whole level. It's a proper boss run. This is a good chance to talk about the game's difficulty. Hunter the Reckoning is not an easy game. We've already discussed that it's balanced for 4 people, but the trade-off is the overly stiff camera. That's all fair enough, and we can take it as a given that the enemies are just a bit too numerous when you're playing with less than 4, as we did. Nevertheless, if you get into good habits and teamwork, the enemy waves are by no means insurmountable, even if it can straight up feel like a bullet hell game at times. But that's not where the game really gets you. The game design is utterly ruthless. Foes will just spawn right on top of you, already attacking with 0 grace period. Hordes of enemies will be directly in your face and hitting you within the first millisecond you enter a level. There's also absolutely no mercy if you get knocked down for any reason. They just keep slapping you while you're down. It's incredibly punishing, and there is often very little counterplay. The game is just kind of cruel, and you have to accept it. You are going to die a lot, but you'll also have a lot of lives to work with.
so that's the balance. It's a game of attrition. After a few attempts, we defeat Warden Dengenhart through the power of melee beatdowns. Also, if it wasn't obvious, the voice acting and overall presentation of this game kicks ass. Dengenhart is certainly the highlight on the voice side.
They came in here. They killed my family. They made me into this thing. I didn't want it. I didn't ask for it. I had no choice!
But the entire cast does a great job. Even the performances that aren't quite exceptional manage to be fun, cheesy bad instead of low-quality bad.
That's right. Don't take no shit from anybody's stuffed animal.
It sells the vibe they were going for. The Hunter video game was gunning for that B-movie feel, and it nails it. The voiceover, the art direction, the camp, the way you dismember your enemies and cause clouds of blood to just erupt from them when you strike them, it's everything. Also, by the way, whatever happened to puffs of blood in games? Sure, they weren't realistic or super gory, but my god were they fun to look at. I think we've gone too realistic with blood. Sometimes I just want to shoot an enemy and have a fine mist come out. Have I gotten old? But yeah, graphically, Hunter was about on par with its peers in terms of, fidelity. It's well behind the cutting-edge visuals of games like Splinter Cell that came out the same year. But in my opinion, I think it actually holds up better. The game hasn't aged a day. I feel like they could have leaned in, farther into that old film look, but the game we got still looks great. Not to mention that the game's animation is top-notch. You always look great in combat no matter what you're doing. It's also incredibly readable, which is important when you're trying to process everything that's going on screen. And can we appreciate the way that they pose the team in cutscenes? How can you not feel cool when you're controlling this cast? After dealing with the Warden, we begin the roundabout route towards Death Row. We'll need to go through the hospital and the morgue, which is only accessible via a nightmarishly long rooftop route. Inside the hospital, we are introduced to many big new mutated enemies, and made to do a truly crazy timed section, where you have like 6 minutes to go through a hospital floor, rescuing 5 hostages, and then escape before it collapses. It is the hardest level in this game by far. Even if you try not to get bogged down in fights and you just run from your enemies, it's still a real scramble for time. We got out on the 5th try with only 10 seconds remaining on the clock. Below the hospital is the morgue, at the end of which is Hadrian, the vampire surgeon who's been mutating victims and stitching them together into monsters. Oh, no, did you think that was Hadrian? No, this guy's Hadrian. He's armed and dangerous. Once the Butcher of Ashcraft is dealt with, we dive back into the sewers to access Death Row. On the way, we discover that Hadrian has pieced back the bodies of Dengenhart's family and is attempting to deliver them to his mansion. Now, Dengenhart's dead, but we burn those as a matter of principle because there's literally nothing good that can come of this. In Death Row, we meet Carpenter once more. He reveals to us who he is and why all of this happened. Arcady's execution was just the spark, but the bonfire had been fully built here already. For decades, prisoners had been drained by vampires or used in sadistic torture experiments by Hadrian and Dengenhart for some foul purpose. Carpenter cackles. Now, with our help, he can finally take revenge on those 2 vampires who tortured him to death in this awful place. Well, don't worry, Sabrina. We already killed those 2 guys for you.
Hadrian is dead, Carpenter.
You killed him? You killed him? Do you have any idea what it takes to get back here? Twice? He was mine! And you stole him from me!
For all of his theatrics, he's an easy enough boss. You run around him in circles and whittle down his health. To finish him off, though, you'll need to destroy the torture chair that anchors him to this world. Arcady is next, and we prepare ourselves to fight another okay, he was a werewolf.
With nipple piercings for some reason.
He is a lot tougher than Carpenter, but we trade our precious save pool of lives to beat him. Surprisingly, as we've got him weakened, he's pretty rational about this whole thing. Killing him isn't gonna do shit. His death was just the last drop that caused the cup to overflow. Arcady's not the anchor holding people here. He didn't cause this. Dengenhart is the anchor. Did we really think that final death would be so easy? He played dead and let us wander off. This was all his doing. Decades of Hadrian practicing the sculpting of flesh, and the pair of them torturing prisoners to death to fill this place with the unquiet dead. Eventually, a hole into the Shadowlands ruptured, all according to plan. And once they were ready, it was easy to do it again. The rave was planned to re-tear open the hole and allow Dangenhart to pull his family's spirits from the Shadowlands and bring them back to life. We race towards the Warden's mansion. Arcady has already lost control, and he and his ghosts assault us every step of the way. Dangenhart gives us his villain monologue.
You're throwing pebbles at giants. Is this really how you want to spend the last moments of your life?
We may have burned the bodies of his family, but he could still place the Forsaken souls into the vessels of captured innocents instead. He battles us, showing off his ultimate powers. But we're hunters. We remember that no matter what form he takes, a vampire is still a vampire. Despite what you might think, the real boss isn't Dangenhart. It's the boards on the wall that block out the sun. As the Warden suffers final death, the veil closes around him. He was the anchor, the fetter for hundreds of angry wraiths that rampaged across the city, and with him dead, they can finally rest. Hunter was a difficult game, and it sure didn't fight fair. And while it frustrated me to no end at many points, none of it was enough to make me actually dislike the game. Hunter was a great time, and I'd highly recommend it for some Halloween meetups with friends this month. It's available on the modern Xbox store, so I recommend you get it there. Now, how good of a Hunter the Reckoning adaptation was it? Well, it lacks in a few big ways. It doesn't really contain much in the way of those punk themes, and that's obviously a big problem. It's also pure action with no role-playing whatsoever, which kind of feels wrong for a game line where you might have to fight an extended court battle after you shoot a zombie in the head. Nevertheless, the circumstances that happen in the video game are largely lore accurate, and it is a style of game that you could replicate in the tabletop if you wanted a more action-packed game. It didn't capture the original tone in many ways, but it managed to have such an excellent and lovable identity of its own that it's virtually impossible to be upset about it. We'll be back to cover the Hunter sequels over the winter, but for this month, I hope you enjoy our month of darkness. See you in the streams, everyone.